A point that I make very often about Genshin's characters is that for all the effort put into them, from their designs to backgrounds to voicing to animations and such, it's a shame there's no meaningful advancements being made to the game's combat to test their limits. A few weeks ago I watched a video from East on Air in which he brilliantly put into words how many of us feel about the game. I was planning to make a video like this myself, but with how comprehensive he was with everything, I couldn't figure out for the life of me how to write my video without making it come off as blatant plagiarism. That's how good it was, and I highly recommend you guys check it out. So after mulling it over a bit, I remembered a few comments I get every now and then where I talk about how there's no new content being released for Genshin in the realm of combat. Usually those comments go along the lines of the characters are the new combat content, suggesting that the way you can still enjoy combat in this game is by using different characters instead of the same ones you always use. That prompted me to make this video instead. Are new characters pointless in Genshin Impact? Should you even pull for new characters if you already have an established roster that can handle every scenario? We'll be addressing all that and more today. The present condition with Genshin right now is that it's thriving in one aspect while stagnating in another. This should not come as a surprise to any of you. In the realm of exploration and story content, I'd say the game has never been better. If you play it exclusively for the open world and the plot, no, not that kind of plot, the actual plot, then you've been eating real good the past couple of years. This category is often referred to as the casual player base. If you're playing Genshin for its fluid mechanics, gameplay premise, and combat elements, things have not been all that great. In fact, with the exception of a new playable element, absolutely nothing has changed about the game from a foundational standpoint. It's exactly the same now as it was back in 2020 when it first came out. This category is referred to as the quote-unquote hardcore player base. Now the two aren't mutually exclusive from each other. Explorers may enjoy progression, while combat enthusiasts may enrich themselves narratively for a spell. At the moment though, that is the arrangement the Genshin player base finds itself in. The one aspect bridging the two factions together is characters, the linchpin of Genshin Impact, as it is for other gachas. For casual players, it's fun to try different playstyles as you take on the overworld content, in addition to being able to experience the gameplay of a character you've spent a lot of time interacting with. For hardcore players, more characters means more advancements in the metagame, pushing the limits on what's possible to achieve and what strategies you can come up with to explode the entire screen. Naturally, it makes a lot of sense for Hoya to invest resources and development time into this system, as it can please players of both demographics, but ultimately it's a two-way street. The means of undertaking and completing content is irrelevant if the content itself doesn't reciprocate the same progress. The scope of combat has not expanded in the slightest. We have new enemies and sometimes a new gameplay mechanic or gimmick, but the scope of a version 4 character is identical to the scope of a version 1 character, begging the question, are new units pointless on a pragmatic level? The short answer is yes, but of course I'll be elaborating. To first address the notion of new characters being the new content for the game, full acknowledgement that is correct, at least superficially. It's been empirically established at this point that Genshin Impact's development model is formulaic. You can learn more about that by watching East on Air's video, which I cannot stress enough. Please go watch his video, it's really good. It's a safe approach to make for a title of this size. With so many different types of players all playing the same game, ambitious changes and expansions run the risk of causing more discontentment than satisfaction. By adhering to the status quo, it at least ensures a stable timeline of service. One way you can experiment is through the characters. Hoyo may hesitate on doing anything drastic with Genshin Impact, but they do enjoy trying new things for characters, even if those attempts fail spectacularly from time to time. Despite the game having few mediums of expression the way classes in MMOs give you 50 million skills and abilities, seeing units like Navia, Xianyun, Wanderer, Neuvillette, Arlecchino, and whatnot, who despite still only having an attack, skill, burst, and 2 passive talents, feel so different from each other is quite a pleasant surprise. So yes, characters are forms of content in and of themselves, but it still doesn't change the fact that if the game itself doesn't evolve, all that innovation is meaningless. To explain where I'm coming from, let's use Pokemon as an example. I understand I mention Pokemon a lot on this channel and some of you might be sick of it, but I find the resemblance and contrast very interesting even though they're not of the same exact genre. The influential factors driving hype and excitement behind a new main series title is that you get a whole new region and most importantly, a whole new generation of Pokemon with new abilities, new attacks, and new experiences. At least you hope. In recent years though, while Pokemon is still a household franchise acquiring new fans on a daily basis, for longtime fans, the childhood nostalgia honeymoon phase has run its course, with many voicing their complaints about how new games are not quite as magical or inventive as old ones. Admittedly, a lot of this could be attributed to higher standards than before and no longer having that childlike wonder. However, what contributes to veteran player fatigue towards the Pokemon franchise is that the experience is almost exactly the same. You have new Pokemon and a new region, but the game has fundamentally remained unchanged. It's the same experience from start to finish. The same progression, same grind, same structure, and everything. Nintendo has made efforts to expand on the Pokemon experience in recent versions though. They added new combat gimmicks like Mega Evolution, Z-moves, Gigantamax and stuff, and then with Sword and Shield they introduced the Wild Area. Then in Scarlet and Violet they added more open world elements, with mixed reception from the player base. Genshin Impact is following a similar trend of waning interest, only they don't release new versions, they build off an existing one, which is worse. Every so often they release a new region with a new storyline and a new roster of characters. They might also introduce a new gameplay mechanic here and there, like how they did with Dendro and Sumeru, and how they added the Osea and Numa thingy in Fontaine, along with proper underwater exploration for the first time. And while that's all well and good, the core gameplay experience feels almost exactly the same day to day now than it was back then, because from a combat and progression standpoint, it is. New units do allow for new interactions and explorations, but no matter how much you switch out the toppings or flavor of ice cream, it's still ice cream. You can only eat so much of it before you get sick of it and want to try something else. To clarify, there's nothing wrong with wanting to stick to a set formula and resist change. Countless times you hear player bases moan and groan about how the old days are so much better and how they want an old school RuneScape or WoW Classic for everything. The reason they feel this way is because there's a clear difference between the game in the present day and the game several years ago. You don't hear anyone complain about wanting an old school gameplay because nothing changed 4 years later. Players always get hyped up whenever a new unit releases, but that excitement goes away after all but a week when they realize it's the same experience as it was for the units they pulled before that and the units they pulled before that. Again, it's the ice cream analogy. New flavor of ice cream, but you already have a lifetime supply of ice cream in the freezer. There needs to be a new craving for the game, so to speak. Have you noticed that all the 5 stars received in version 4 so far are measurably stronger on average than in past versions? Lini, Neuvillette, Risley, Furina, Navia, Xianyun, Chiori, Arlecchino, not a single miss, and yes, that does include Risley and Chiori. Not much attention was given to either of them, but gameplay-wise, they're both highly competitive units, only held back by Geo and Cryo, not their own respective kits. And yet despite how good version 4's characters are compared to version 3 and 2, players don't feel the same compulsion or enthusiasm to go after them. I do remember there was mention of Xianyun's banner in 4.4 breaking records for the highest amount of sales on the first day despite there being a supposed push for a boycott at the time. But 1, it's come to my attention that Genshin Lab is not a trustworthy site for banner sales. 2, I'm willing to bet money that Nahida contributed a ton. And 3, first day sales are never indicative of the whole story. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. Metrics aside, when you look at discussion for new characters, with the exception of Neuvillette and possibly Furina, the reception for almost every 5-star from Fontaine onward has thus far been, they're good but ultimately skippable. Objectively, this applies to the majority of 5 stars. I'd be hard pressed to call anyone a must-pull apart from at most 3. With Genshin's veteran players having more than enough characters and teams to take on a 5-party Spiral Abyss or more, unless they're completely meta-defining, there's no reason to wail for new units. Why would they? The game's combat has not changed in years. It doesn't matter if, for the sake of argument, Arlecchino and Lini are stronger than Hu Tao and Diluc when the game can still more than easily be cleared with your existing units. They might offer a novel experience on doing so, but there's not a single incentive to outside of personal attachment. The absence of power creep in Genshin is good for your bottom line, as you don't have to throw hundreds of dollars at the game on a monthly basis the way you're pressured to in other gachas. But refusing to expand on the game's combat whatsoever is hurting not just player retention, but character reception. I'm not even talking about endgame content at this point, it's a question of the combat itself, by extension the game's progression. Calling back to Pokemon for a moment, even though I said earlier that new generations aren't as appealing due to the experience being mostly the same on a macro scale, one reason its games have such a strong replayability factor is the micro scale, demonstrated by the ability to reset your progression. You can start a new game and try things again, possibly in a different way. In recent years, challenge runs like Nuzlocking have become quite popular. It forces you to try new Pokemon that otherwise you would not have used. Moreover, you get to experience a full-scale adventure with that new team, even if that road's one you've taken before. Would building a new team be nearly as gratifying if you did it at the end of the game? Probably not. Characters need to serve a purpose. Why is Kasa so widely used and pulled for? Because he facilitates more teams than I can even count. Why is Yelan so popular? Because she's a very comfortable fit into any team that needs Hydro and makes use of normal attacks. Also, she can do a lot of damage herself. Why is Nahida so popular? She single-handedly breaks any semblance of difficulty in the game. Why is Zhongli so popular? He single-handedly breaks any semblance of difficulty in the game. Why is Neuvillette so popular? He single-handedly breaks any semblance of difficulty in the game. Okay, maybe there's a recurring theme here, but you get what I mean. New characters are pointless because they don't serve a purpose. The game doesn't have anything in place that, at the end point of our progression, after you've already gone through the entirety of Genshin Impact, compels you to think that you need this unit to enhance your progression, because there is no progression left. The only thing you can do with them is go back and rematch bosses or dungeons you've already cleared before with other teams, but that experience does not and will not ever be the same as back when you took them on the first time, since you already have an established team. You could take it upon yourself to make a brand new account and start fresh, but unlike Pokemon, units are not free, you have to pull for them. You can't wake up one day and say, I'm gonna make a brand new account and use Ayato and get started. He may not even be available. And do you really want to spend hundreds of dollars every time you do this? Genshin's not a playthrough based game, it's an endless progression. Games have massive expansions or new major systems added every so often because it freshens up the gameplay of existing characters, while at the same time encouraging players to go for brand new units who were designed with the expansion or system in mind rather than getting retrofitted by them. I used to play Final Fantasy Brave Exvius back in the day, and when I first started, the max rarity for units was 6 stars. Base 5-star units could be promoted to 6 and get new attacks and abilities. A couple years into the game, they implemented 7-star, allowing units to become even stronger. While several 6-stars could promote to 7-star, they also made new units appealing on account of them being intentionally built around that new level of power. A few more years later, they released Neo-Visions, effectively 8-star rarity. Once more, 5-star units were retroactively buffed to be able to ascend to Neo-Vision, but they also released characters who were Neo-Visions right from the start. On top of their base rarity being Neo-Vision instead of 5-star, they also gained access to a form known as Brave Shift, essentially letting you shift from one playstyle to another. Players had a huge incentive to pull for base NV units because they had something you could not obtain in older characters, and naturally the game's content scales and difficulty to account for these new expansions and power level. Hoyo does a fantastic job doing what they can with the limited scope of character design, but the game itself is still the same. The way you build a character is the same, the way you figure out how to use them and what to use them on is the same. Unless the character in question is so disrespectfully overpowered the way Neuvillette was, there will not be as much of a reason to pull for new units because all bases at this point have been covered. Dendro was so refreshing for the game since it was a new element. Regardless of if you were a whale or free-to-play, everyone was committed to building up their Dendro rosters, making units like Yao Yao, Dignati, and whatnot very appealing despite objectively being nowhere close to top tier. But they didn't have to be. They were part of something nothing before that could emulate. Am I saying we need a new element to every version? No. I mean, it would be interesting. Deansleaf doesn't appear to have any elements belonging to the 7. A couple years ago, Cat with Blue Hat made a video theorizing more elements that could be implemented. There are many ways to incentivize pulling for new units. You can go down the conventional power creep route where old units are just not strong enough to keep up with the meta, forcing players to go for the new ones who are strong enough, or you can go the feature creep route, where say, you introduce playable delusions, so new units can switch between 2 elements. You can add a character with 2 elemental skills, maybe a stance change in a similar fashion to Farinas, but affecting the entire kit. Beyond characters, you can also, of course, for the 10th time, add new game modes. Honkai Star Rail introduces new game modes because they understand if we only had Memory of Chaos, there would be zero reason to pull for anyone who wasn't better than the best. If Genshin added a survival game mode to where the goal was to stay alive for as long as you could, then units with great sustainability would take precedence over damage. If they release dungeons that force you to bring units only of a certain weapon type like only sword and bow users, then you might feel more compelled to pull for a high tier or even a mid tier bow user since they're really good at the bow dungeon. If Genshin doesn't evolve its combat, character, or progression elements on a systematic level, this will only continue to exacerbate. Natlands, Najinaya, and whatever areas that come after, there will come a time where there will be no practical reason to go for new characters. Waifu over meta will always be in effect, but if you're approaching this in regards to what will be an improvement to your account, if you already have, for instance, Bennett, Shangling, and a main DPS, whether Hu Tao, Linny, or Arlecchino, you basically will never need a new Pyro character ever again, since the game doesn't make you have to get one. I swear, every time I make a video like this, it frustrates me to hell. There is so much potential you can do with Genshin's combat that likely takes far less effort and wherewithal than giant overworld expansions, which only makes it more confounding why they don't do it. If they want new characters to be worth pulling for, the game has to evolve. I'm not talking about a new gimmick, I'm talking about changing the game to where it's conspicuously different from what it was back in 2020. What do you guys think? Do you agree that new characters are pointless, or do you think there is still merit behind pulling for someone even if you have plenty of characters of that element already? Feel free to share in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at VarsVerum, join my Discord server, and check out my other Genshin discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.